I'm Frank. I come to you from a far, far away kingdom called Hong Kong. It is very nice to see human activities outside of our kingdom. But it's also very nice to be in Singapore, just seeing everyone alive and talking to each other and, yeah, just being human. It's a busy day, but I must say we all made it here. And I think in the end of the day, we just want to be people, get to know each other, actually figure out what to do next. So I just want you guys to feel relaxed. The questions are going to be simple. No commercial talk, just like we're at a hawker center, okay? You ready?
Absolutely. Love hawker centers.
All right, so I was going to do an introduction talk, but since Shirley did it so lovely, we might just go straight into the questions. Now, the first question is, we all say lifetime value, but what the heck does that even mean to us, right? So maybe we just go around and just kind of do like elevator talk, like what exactly is lifetime value to you and your business? And I'll just start with John.
Sure, yeah. So I don't think I'm going to explain what lifetime value is. I think we're all marketers here. We all kind of know what that means. But from my organization's perspective, some ways that we use to kind of track that is really we use a lot of that RFM model, right? Recency, frequency, and monetary value like as well. You know, as an airline, I don't think that we are unfamiliar with lifetime value. You know, we are one of the first industries to have a very detailed loyalty program, as you all know. So that's kind of how we really trace that. But how things have changed since the pandemic is that, you know, obviously, you know, the frequency has dropped quite a bit for the last 2 years, right? And so basically what we're trying to do right now is to really also relook at what other values we can get from, you know, a customer lifetime value beyond just the monetary part, right? Because, for instance, right now we're also looking at things like influence and cloud, right? So think about something like, you know, we've got all the tier loyalty members, right? It depends on how much you spend with the airline, how often that you fly with us. But we're also starting to look at things like, you know, who's making those decisions, right? Like, what if we made a card just for mom and the family, right? And then she can basically influence where dad and the kids go and things like that. So we're starting to look into a little bit more of how segments are changing, how new ways of traveling are changing, and to see how we can derive additional value from our guests. Yeah.
And what about you?
Yeah, good question, right? So I'm going to start it from a Foodpanda's context, right? So when we talk about customer lifetime value, I think it's really easy to use that jargon, right? But I think it really boils down to a few very important factors. So if you think about Foodpanda as a business, it's about quick commerce. You want to deliver fast. And from a customer standpoint, we really look at a few things. So number one is frequency of order, right? Obviously, I want somebody to order the delivery from me multiple times in a month. Then you have to look at the basket sizes as well, right? Of course, you want a higher basket size because that then kind of relates into your profit margins, right? Which is another important factor. And the third and the last one is really the most important, which is retention, right? Because when you talk about lifetime value, the very key part of the lifetime value is I want to retain the customer as long as possible. So that really comes hand in hand with your customer journey. So you really want to start from the very, very beginning and look at how do you onboard your new customers? How do you really, really make sure that this person have a really positive experience, right, when he starts onboarding with you? And for one of your valued customers, the ones that have been ordering with you a lot, how do you keep them happy, right? So customer satisfaction, the experience of it, how do you continue to serve them well?
Can I just ask you a quick question then?
Please.
It's always easy to get the good experience, but what if someone had a really bad time with Foodpanda?
Exactly.
How do you bring them back?
No, that's a really, really good point because that leads me to the last one, which is on retention, because a lot of time, a lot of marketeers always talk about churn, right? So that's the ones where they had bad experience. Those are the ones that actually feel like, you know what, the delivery was so slow, I won't use your service anymore. And every time when I talk to marketeers, I always say that if I want to look at churn analysis and retaining customers, that's always the last resort because that's always the ones that really requires high effort. And in terms of results, that may not be the one that is most favorable, right? So a lot of effort needs to be in that. It's not just about incentives. It's not just about vouchers to bring them in. It's really about how do you prove to them that your brand really, really looks after your customers, right? So how you really take that very seriously, and that's where effective communication really comes into play, right? So that's how I see lifetime value plays in Foodpanda.
So if you were to rate Foodpanda's lifetime value current score? 1 out of 10.
I always believe that there's room for improvement. So I
Good
would say,
question. Humble. Good. Yeah.
So I'll say it's a 7 or 8.
Good. That's good. Thank you. Josh, good to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too, Frank. Thank you very much.
So for you, you're kind of helping people figure out what is lifetime value. So what is your say?
Yeah, absolutely. For those who don't know who Crimtan is, we're essentially a programmatic platform that specializes in life cycle marketing. So for us at our core and at our platform, it's all about trying to maximize that CLV that we've been talking about. And for, to John's and Bernard's point, data is at the key of that, at the heart of that. But not only data, you also have to look at creative as well. So is it a new customer that doesn't know your brand? Or is it, somebody who's in market that may be using a competitor brand? The way that you speak to them and where they are in the journey is really, really important. And then, underpinning all of that is making sure that, each stage of the journey for a customer is mapped out essentially to the brand. And everyone, every brand has a unique life cycle. And the way that you engage with your customers is bespoke. So it's not a one size fits all. So for us, it's really, making sure that when we talk to our brands or our agency partners, it's really understanding what their approach is, their brand, and understanding how do we use data, creative, and investment strategies, things like media, to maximize that CLV. But, that's essentially it from a programmatic point of view.
Okay. All right.
Let me just kind of add,
Yeah, of course.
I really agree with what Josh was saying, because the whole point about customer lifetime value is that you're building this relationship, right? I know that we're looking at it from a monetary point of view, but I think something that could be pretty insulting to a client is that, if you're not able to kind of track the end to end, and I have a 10-year relationship with you, but if you're showing me messaging and messages that makes me feel like, hey, we've just met, right? That is a big faux pas in my opinion, right? So absolutely agree with everything that you just shared.
Okay, so building on that, John, then what are some sort of challenges you are facing right now? If you're coming, especially for travel, right? Coming back out of pandemic, you're recovering. As we all know, in Europe, airline is having some serious issue right now. How does that, I guess you can talk about the challenges of your current growing lifetime value. Oh my God, even saying it is hard, right? It's tongue-tied. And also just kind of share overall what's happened.
Yeah, absolutely. I think what I can share here, and the reason why I say that is because, we've actually gone through that as well, right? We had very disparate systems where, we weren't able to do attribution from end to end, for instance, right? So you have one campaign here that treats Frank like, the best thing ever, right? And then you're like our number one customer. And there's campaign number 2 from department number 2, that doesn't know Frank from anyone, right? So I think one of the silver lining for us, at least as an organization, as an airline during the pandemic, is that, we were able to kind of stop for a little bit, right? We halted all our marketing campaigns. And then we really looked at, a little bit of what was shared in the previous presentation, like how things are going to recover in the next, 3 to 5 year period, right? And we saw, a huge need to really invest in MarTech. So what we did was, over the past 2 years, we moved a lot of our siloed systems to the cloud. And then from there, we were able to create this unified profile to really start to bring together and piece together this profile of Frank, for instance. And then suddenly all departments start to know who Frank for who he really is, right? And then you get departments suddenly realizing that, hey, Frank's actually purchased, from our domestic team. He's been buying domestic flights for a very long time. And so you start to kind of see a lot of more of these, right? And the thing is that I mentioned about loyalty members at the start, but because I look after the international like markets, sometimes people can be flying on JAL for maybe 5 times, but they just never thought of signing up for the loyalty member because if you're from Singapore, obviously KrisFlyer is really big here, right?
Yes.
But then there's a lot of things that we can do, so that's where we kind of see new opportunities. Yeah.
Sorry, I have to do something. Just putting myself in a person's shoes.
Yeah.
Every time someone says cloud, my brain goes to cloud. I'm like, what happened there? Can you tell me a bit more about what do you mean you decide to throw everything into the cloud?
So basically, when we say throw everything to the cloud, is really we're a lot of old proprietary systems, right? So different databases for different functions, right? So we moved all of it to the cloud, and then we were working with partners to really get that. Number one, there's a CDP involved as well, right? Then there's a content management system. A lot of it has been moved there so that there's better security and better efficiency.
What's CDP?
customer data platform.
Oh.
Yeah, come on, Frank. Like, I'm pretty
No,
sure
I'm
we
not
all.
asking for myself. I'm just trying to make it easy for everyone to approach it.
Yeah,
You know?
no, I mean, so that's one part of it, right? So there's a lot of own platforms that we have that we're moving there. And another thing that we're also looking for are partners that share that same vision, right? I think back then a lot of times, when we run certain campaigns with different partners, they're just looking at their one part of that campaign. And I think there's also a cultural shift that needs to happen, right? For instance, in our organization, Department B could just be looking at their own metric, right? All I care for is I want to get sales for this time. But that could basically have detriment effects, for the entire customer lifetime journey, right? So I think with this, moving everything to the cloud and working with partners to understand this unified ID allows us to be a lot more consistent in our approach.
Got it. That makes sense. So basically, you're trying to find a better way to look at the whole picture.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, then for you in Foodpanda, your data is probably growing out of control tremendously right now. What are you doing to control it? Like better streamline it, use it in the right way, ethically, etc.
No, I mean, that's a good question, because if you go back to the previous question in terms of challenge, definitely for Foodpanda, it's really how do you unify or leverage the data, right? Because there's so much of it. So I think, back to your question, then it really boils down to the importance of data, right? In terms of which is highly important and which is not as important. And I'm a really, really big advocate for personalization, right? So if you use Foodpanda as an example, there's going to be some things where it's really important. For example, serving visuals of non-halal food to someone that's halal, right? That's like a no-no. So you want to make sure that there is certain importance in terms of ranking of what kind of visuals, what kind of things that you do. So that's very important. So prioritizing what is most important to make sure that you do not make those mistakes. And also then looking at how do you unify the data, because right now data is so accessible, right? You have your CRM, you have your digital web analytics, you have so much of this. How do you kind of make sense out of it, right? I think that's going to be key.
Yeah, well, then that would be a good leeway to you, Josh. When customers come to you and they have data from literally every source, their Salesforce, they just sign up a bunch of vendors. How do you, what do you, then they want to say, okay, I'm just going to throw it at you. Please do a campaign for me. Where do you go from there?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I actually want to touch on something that Mr. Singhal said from DBS earlier today. There's brands are at different stages in their maturity. It sounds like hearing from Bernard and Jonathan, you're at a really good stage there. And I think some of the challenges we have is when we talk to brands, they want to get to that later stage, but they don't actually have the building blocks in place to actually do that. So one of the challenges, definitely kind of what you said, Jonathan, is around having silos, right? When you have things in silos, it's very difficult to connect. And then it leads to things like data wastage, leakage, that kind of thing, and inefficiencies particularly for programmatic buyers. And I think there's, with programmatic now, there's an association that it's just display, right? But now programmatic is open up to many different channels. So we're seeing things like digital out of home becoming, you can buy that programmatically. You can buy connected TV, CTV, smart TVs, and things like that, digital audio. So now, there's an opportunity to start to connect that in a way where you can centralize the data, the creative, and again, going back to that CLV piece, is being able to communicate with your different audiences in different ways. The challenge is really understanding that, and helping the brands that we work with get to that next stage, and showing them essentially a single kind of view of the customer life cycle.
Yeah, sounds like transparency is really important these days, because data can be such a messy little thing. But if you be able to help the marketers really honestly see the truth of how you did it, how you combine it, and what you're going to do next, is what's really going to be the most meaningful thing. So make sure when you go next door, you ask them these questions. Make sure they are helping you with transparency and stuff. Okay, so going on to the next question, which is one of the biggest buzzword of our industry that really is never ending. And today we just got news they're going to extend it again. It's cookieless. Yay. Yeah, so the pandemic is over, but the cookieless is still around. The talk is still here, and looks like our quarantine just got extended. So you're going to be figuring out what to do with cookieless again. Obviously, I'm a bit sarcastic about it, but maybe you guys can do a more honest thought about it. We'll start with you. What do you think about this whole situation right now with cookieless?
Oh, I'm going to say it is actually more a boon for marketers than a bane if you look at the long term, right? I think what they're doing right now with extending that, it's like extending a runway. You only need so much to really take off, right? So extending the runway, and if you're still on the runway and you're not taking off, if you're using this as a crutch, then you're going to get it into trouble, right? So I think for us, we definitely have been trying to populate our first-party data a lot better because we have seen and we have started running tests, right? So we started running tests even during like the pandemic. This is where you see how important CLV and loyalty really is because it was very clear that during the pandemic when we were running very niche campaigns, very targeted campaigns, people with certain CLV segments, people with some form of loyalty with your brand, and even first-party data outperform those that were bought from elsewhere. But I would say that right now, what is a challenge that we have, right, is to really work with partners that also have this unified first-party data that has rich first-party data. Because as an airline, our data recency has really not been that updated for the past years. But it doesn't mean that these audiences, simply because they don't fly with us, it doesn't mean that they're not spending, right? So we're working a lot with partners like maybe payment methods, credit card payment, and maybe even partners like yourself, right, where you have a rich first-party data that's not like aggregated, and we would leverage on you, do some data sharing to really target new audiences or even existing audiences that may have been dormant for us, but they've been active somewhere else, right? So I think that's really important.
Sounds like it actually made you more creative.
It actually did, and it also made us think really more long term, right? Like we really had to re-envision what the value is in CLV because, with third-party data, the cookies and everything, it was so easy. It was relatively easy to reach, in a way, more people. But maybe it's less quality, right? So like right now, you really have to think that, hey, how can I further nurture these people that are my cash cows, for example, right? Best performing customers and all that, yeah.
Cool. And for you guys at Foodpanda?
Yep. So I think in my humble opinion, I always feel that third-party cookies is never perfect, right? I mean, I'm sure a lot of marketers here that actually use cookies know that you always experience like the very, very low match rates and it's never perfect, right? And the reason is also because this is actually open source information. So whatever you're gonna get, your competitor or your potentially has it as well, right? So I think what changed from becoming cookieless is organizations are becoming more invested in quality rather than quantity. Right? So in terms of the data accuracy, leveraging on consented first-party data, that's really the way to go, right? So I think that's why Foodpanda really invests a lot in making sure that we get the data accuracy right, getting be it real time, and then how do you then action it, right? How do you use it in all your CRM, in your out of homes, and so on and so forth.
So where are you guys at in terms of adapting to cookieless? Are you still concerned? You're good? You don't care?
Yep. So I see it as not saying that we don't care, but because it's still a part of what a lot of organizations are doing. But for us, it's really of like we're just thinking of moving on, right, to the world with cookies.
No, I love that. Yeah, we got to move on. Yeah. Hello.
Yeah, thanks, Frank. So for those who don't know, Google came out earlier today to say that 2023 is not going to be the cookie apocalypse anymore. They're going to push it back a year. That's news that's just come out. But I think the message from us is don't wait. Like for brands and advertisers, be prepared now, and essentially move on. I think with us at Crimtan, and from a programmatic point of view, taking it back to CLV and customer life cycles and things like that, using a third-party cookie or just a cookie in general has never been great. Like it, resonating with what Bernard and John said. Essentially, if you want to track a user or engage a user throughout your customer life cycle, With a cookie, you only got about 30 days to interact with them because then they drop off, they lose the cookie. So when they come back in, they're essentially a new user potentially to you if you don't have that visibility on it. With the ID solutions that are coming out, you're not limited to just cookies now, right? So there's things like unified IDs. At Crimtan, we have our active ID, which uses a multiple data points where we essentially not based on cookies. And what we're able to do is engage with customers much longer than 30 days, 90 days, even 9 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months down the line, we're able to see visibility of these users within the programmatic space.
Quick question. Can you only work with one vendor on cookieless technology, or can you work with multiple?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Frank, and I think it should be multiple, and I think that's where we need to get to. There's not going to be one single solution, so it's not just use Crimtan solution and not worry about Salesforce as an example. Those solutions can be integrated. For us, our solution is agnostic, so if you want to use something like Adobe, Salesforce, Mr. Singhal showed that kind of MarTech thing before, right? It's like super complicated. There's 8,000 kind of different things out there. If you use your own thing, you've invested in something, my advice would be to make sure that those platforms that you use can be integrated with your own systems. And essentially, it's another data point that we can see and utilize to see essentially the customer lifetime.
Thank you. So we are running out of time. If there's anyone who has questions, I'm just going to let them do one more final thing. And if you have a question, just get ready, because you have to just scream it out. No, I'm kidding. Okay, so to end this, nowadays, just like the keynote speaker just spoke about, there's so much going on. There is omni-channel, there's digital out of home, there is mobile, there is cookie-less. But in the end of the day, we're simply doing one thing, right? To grow our customer lifetime value. So coming back to that sincerity and simplicity, what exactly are you doing right now to do that?
So I'm not going to talk about the tech side of things, right? Because there's so much going on there. But since you mentioned about simplicity, we look at it from a KISS point of view. I think we all know what KISS is, right? But in this context, it's really, really keep your objectives very clear, right? Like, what are the different segments and what are the values that you're looking at, and be very clear in terms of like what you want to do. This, regardless of the technology should empower you to do it, but it shouldn't impede you from that clear key objective. And then the second is really invest in the right platform and partners, right? So a little bit to what Josh has shared. We work with Adobe, we work with Salesforce, right? And we're also looking with partners that can integrate well with these tech stack. And then the first S is basically really to have sustained and relevant engagement, right? So throughout the pandemic, even though people weren't flying, we sustained that engagement, right? We don't hard sell, we don't ask them to fly. But if there's any indication that they need to fly, for instance, right, we are able to better support them and to really keep that engagement strong, right? Like if it's a relationship, don't be like an insurance agent where you don't talk to me for 10 years and then you just call me and then suddenly you want to sell me something. So don't do that. The last S that I have is really to, what was that last S that I had? I suddenly can't remember it. But
wait, do you want? Just kidding. It's stupid. Keep it simple.
No, definitely not that.
Okay.
Yeah. So the last one really is, apart from sustaining that, we really need to be able to showcase our real value proposition, right? So the thing that we mentioned a lot here is that you can talk about cookies or how you want to target those people, but if your value proposition to them isn't something that they really need, like they're gonna cut that relationship. So for us, for instance, during the pandemic, we had new segments like repatriation flights, right? And luggage being a big thing, and airlines earn a lot from luggage. We were giving free unlimited luggage for people who needed to return and things like that. So that's kind of how we deal with it. Yeah,
that's cool. For you, Bernard?
Yep. So I think John mentioned a lot of very good points there. So for me, I think for Foodpanda as an organization, right, it's really same thing. You really just need to make sure that as a whole organization, the North Star is aligned, right, with marketing, with the commercial teams and all so on and so forth. With that, whatever you're doing in terms of increasing the lifetime value of your customer comes in really easily, right? And from that point, I think another advice that I would say is loyalty programs is not a silver bullet anymore, right? It's really hard to get customers' loyalty. So with that, it really couples into play with effective communication, making sure that with the data that we have, we give what the customer wants. It's as simple as that, right?
Thank you, Bernard. Josh?
Yeah, just kind of my final thoughts on today's topic is really there's an abundance of technology out there. So looking at what your programmatic needs are and using those vendors to help you understand a holistic approach is something that I feel like because of the deprecation of the third-party cookie, we're at a new dawn of marketing now, and it's actually much more sophisticated. So I kind of touched on it before. Is that programmatic now is not just banners. There's a lot of other channels that you can plug into now. So working with vendors that have the same North Star and the same understanding of your goal is super important, as opposed to looking at more siloed solutions. So for example, just heavy retargeting as an example, working with another vendor to do your branding and awareness and having a disjointed approach. You're definitely going to have inefficiencies there. And I think we're at a stage now where there's a lot of sophistication in the market. And being able to do that it should be done now, regardless of where we're at with Google and cookies.
Thank you. Is there any questions? No? Okay. I think to close, from all of us just saying, I think as much as we're all data people, let's not forget that on the other end, it's a human. It's a human that just simply wants to interact with you, and make sure we always bring back that humanity into it. And that's actually what's going to help you in your marketing too. Thank you, gentlemen. Thank you, everyone.